Hi. Today I want to talk about All Quiet on the Western Front. Um, Out of the gate, this is the best book I have read and will probably review on this channel by far. It beats The Great Gatsby. Um, it's written very beautifully, but at the same time, it's written very bluntly, which is why this review is probably the hardest review I've ever done, because usually there's some greater meaning to it, which in some cases there are. But I mean, it's clear as day is what they're talking about in the book. And another thing is that usually in the beginning of these videos, I talk about the author and stuff like that. But I'm not going to do that in this case a whole lot because this time the entire introduction is just about the book process and the entire life of the author. And I either have two options of either A, I just word for word read that, or B, I try and find a different way. And I'm going with the latter. To me, that feels like stealing. Um, it's probably different from other versions of the book, but my translator and the guy who did the introduction, his name is Kurt Beals, and he did a phenomenal job of keeping the book almost as original as possible, which is pretty much impossible to do because it's in a different language, and especially in German to English, even though they have very close ties with one another. German, you have the subject of a sentence is like at the end. Meanwhile, in English, the subject is at the beginning, so you kind of have to twist the German sentence from its ending and then put it at the beginning, which is really hard to do. But with that out of the way, it's mainly gonna be spoiler free. Actually, probably one of my first videos ever to be spoiler free, pretty much. A little here and there spoilers, but I mean, relatively, you're gonna read. I'm not gonna talk a whole bunch about the book itself, but we'll talk about enough to probably get you interested if you haven't read it. But this takes place during World War One, and specifically in between the years of after the Somme, so around 1916, up until almost the end of the war, so 1918. Now, when this book was made, which was the 20s, if I remember correctly, and then it would have a film adaptation in 31. It was revered in the Western world, but it was heavily disliked in Germany, which is what in the introduction it talked about. However, it is not talked about how it was also banned because in countries like Poland and the Soviet Union because it humanized German soldiers. It was banned in Germany because the book itself is an anti-war book, and probably one of the first successful anti-war books. There were anti-war books before then, but they're usually by pacifists, and rarely anybody's a pacifist because it usually doesn't work. And it was made by pacifists for pacifists, so the general public did not read them. And since the author himself was a German soldier during World War One, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that he was not a pacifist. Otherwise, he was not a Desmond Doss type of guy. He was not a conscientious objector. I mean, he probably did kill people, which is the opposite of pacifism. But the main character of the story is Paul Boehmer. It's spelled Bomber, but apparently it's pronounced Boehmer, which is, the Germans are doing something else. I don't understand it personally, but whatever. And he is characterized very beautifully because he is ordinary enough where you basically have the average German soldier perspective. He's averaging up, but at the same time, he is not boring. He has his own interests, like poetry and stuff like that, and he mainly reads outside of German circles. Germany at this time was not known for its artistic stuff. It was mainly known for its military. Uh, like before Germany was formed, the state or country that formed Germany was named Prussia, and its entire how historians refer to Prussia as a I believe it's an army with a state, meaning that the army was basically in complete control. But this book, it's anti-war, and it heavily is against. Throughout the book, it blames people in positions of power for World War One. In the book, Paul specifically, he blames his teachers for indoctrinating them into believing that war was all about glory, and then they get into war and then it failed miserably. It's not about glory, and it's just death on both sides where people will be forgotten and will not die heroically, but instead kind of shamelessly in a trench where you're going to get buried and nobody's going to remember you besides your family. Um, yeah, he blames his teachers, and he blames officers in the military because they abuse enlisted men, and they do it just because they have power. The author himself, during his lifetime, he also absolutely hated Wilhelm II, because he blames him. The author blamed him for the war, and I mean, it's just you're gonna have to look that up yourself. But it was, you look at what his ideas about Wilhelm II were, they were not very flattering. Let's just say that he after the war, Wilhelm II went to the Netherlands in exile, and he kind of wanted him to stay there forever, and he probably will. Even in death, his grave is in the Netherlands. Um, but yeah, it's a depressing book, obviously, from the start all the way up until the end, and you just see the slow and absolutely suffocating um mental deterioration and and sometimes physical deterioration of the German soldiers, and especially Paul, because anytime he tries to distance himself away from the war, he ends up just hurting himself and thinks about more about the war, which creates a negative feedback loop of, I don't want to think about the war, but then I think about how great it could be, how it could have been, and how after the war I'm not gonna have a very good life, and how he basically daydreams a lot throughout the book about nature in of itself, which him also being like into poetry and the books and stuff like that, especially during this time where, especially in America, which which is the author's main demographic, is Americans, is where this idea that a spirituality and nature, it's past that, but the ideas in this book are relatively influenced by transcendentalism, where nature is very important, that we should preserve it as much as possible, which contrasts to how there's basically no trees, it's just a flat field in trench warfare, and how all of the vegetation is gone, and it's just endless slog between two armies of people who would probably get along better than the actual people giving them the orders to kill one another. Um, And I would say that this book is also very anti-nationalist because how World War One started is that all the countries wanted to be on top of the other, essentially, and to be more powerful than the other. And all nationalism is saying, hey, my country is better than yours, which is fine. I mean, in my opinion, I do believe that some countries are better than others. If you think that the United States is worse than North Korea, I'm going to be questioning you. But, agree to disagree, I guess. Um, but it does become a problem when you and other countries create a world conflict which basically demolishes and disintegrates an entire generation of young men who will be aimless, and so aimless to the point that they are called the lost generation, where nobody really understood them, which will give us the term shell shocked, which we call now PTSD, or post traumatic stress disorder. Um, and World War One did not really do a lot. It didn't accomplish really anything. Like there's some wars where there's something's accomplished. Best example I could give is the American Civil War. The American Civil War was about slavery. The North was anti-slavery. The South was pro-slavery. The South lost, and thus the 13th Amendment of slavery being illegal was passed, and so is the 14th and 15th Amendment. The 14th being freedmen being allowed to vote. Um, but yeah, clearly there's like a purpose. Here, everybody suffers in one way or another. Every country suffers. I mean, the people who lost, like Germany and Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, I mean, they're on the losing side. But how about the winning side? Well, you got Italy. They were on the winner side of World War One. They were promised a lot of territory, but they didn't get nearly as much territory as was promised to them, and their economy tanked, especially during the whole Great Depression, to the point that it was called the mutilated victory, and it would be the first ever fascist country, which would then lead to, which would then help create World War II. The United States is also another great example. We lost about 100,000 people, give or take, and I mean, it really didn't change much to us. It just confirmed the belief to the people there that war is bad and that we should stay isolationists, and that said isolationism would only lead to us getting bombed by the Japanese in our entry in World War II. France, they lost a lot of people, and from 1871 all the way up until Germany was defeated, they had been teaching their children that Germany is evil and that we need to get our lost territories back. And they did. Thing is, though, is that after World War One, they didn't move on from it. And thus, you get invaded by a technologically inferior enemy, Nazi Germany, and you lose. And you need the British, Canadians, Americans to help you out over that brutal regime. Britain didn't win either because their empire ended up. This would be like a turning point in their empire where they started to lose power because of the amount of people that had died and the promise that small nations might be free, which is why they were supporting Belgium, because Belgium was supposed to be a neutral country during World War One until Germany invaded it and Britain had to come in, which gave the excuse for the Irish to declare their independence. So they would lose some territories after World War II and during the interwar period. I mean, not after World War II, after World War One and during the interwar period. Um, and yeah, and the countries that did quote unquote win after World War One would end up either losing something during World War Two, or they lost too many people in order to really get them back to where they were. Um, yeah, it just showed it. World War One just kind of showed how pointless it was. I I mean, like nobody won, and the only thing it accomplished was the following circumstances for up to World War Two. And people would get many different interpretations of this. Most people said, all right, we will not do this ever again. All right, war is bad. We should avoid it at all costs. But some people, like Adolf Hitler, actually entrenched their beliefs that nationalism is good, and that it wasn't Germany's like fault for nationalistic pride, or that uh, or that or that they could have won. It was all just because of Wilhelm II, and that's why the Nazis should be in power, because they can restore greatness back, and that they were stabbed in the back. Stabbed in the back was a myth that was created after World War One. Communists rose up in southeastern Germany, in Bavaria, and that communist uprising was quickly defeated by the now democratic government, and that was the first dividing point in between people who were either going to be communists, or people who were going to be far right-leaning militarists, and eventually the Nazis would triumph over the communists, and that and sort of gain violence. But no, like I said, nobody won. Nobody really felt good. Quite literally, it's a very depressing book, and I do heavily recommend it. And I wish I was doing it justice, but it's really hard to do this book justice when it is best for you to talk as little as possible. So, I mean, in conclusion, this is a 10 out of 10. I hope that if you haven't read it, that you buy it. And in my next video, I'm going to talk about the two movies of the book that I have watched. I've watched the 1931 version, and I've watched the much more recent 2022 version. I know there's a 1970s version, but I haven't seen that. And I'll get more into depth, like I'll actually talk about it more. But I just want people to have the chance to at least read the book, or to at least understand a little bit more before I spoil it to them this time around. So it won't be like this most of the time. Most of the time I will just talk about the book and how much I either enjoyed it or what I think went wrong with it. But genuinely, this is a fantastic book that you need to read on your own, because words won't do it justice. Yeah, that's it. So yeah.